Hey guys, so we're in lesson 3 in unit 5, and we're going to talk about pests today. So, preventing pesky pests is what it's called. And they give a really great example of a horrible pest that really truly impacted um, American agriculture. It was devastating. So, that's the boll weevil. If you have grandparents that maybe their grandparents farmed or their parents, ask them about the boll weevil because they probably know what it is and they're going to tell you how much damage it did, okay, especially to the cotton industry. So it says few pests have had as much impact on the economy as the boll weevil. It was in the late 1800s, so in 1892, it moved from Mexico to the United States and it destroyed the American South agriculture for 20 years. So this infestation was terrible. They thrive in cotton plants. And really, they didn't affect other crops as much, but cotton was what they devastated, which, if you know anything about South American agriculture, like South United States, we have a lot of cotton, right? Texas grows a lot, Arkansas, um, even Alabama, and things like places like that. So this insect is so destructive to cotton because it lays eggs before it blooms in the fruiting buds, and which are the fluffy white balls which cotton is made. It's called the boll weevil because it lives in the balls, the cotton. So it's really not obvious in the early stages, but as the eggs hatch and larvae, which you need to know is the worm-like insects in their early phase of development, as they mature, they eat the bud, which drops off the plant. So therefore, the very part of the plant that farmers need, the cotton, is eaten by the boll weevil. And so you don't, and the presence in the fields littered with hollowed buds rather than harvestable cotton. So it just looks empty and naked. And that's that little creature right there. So he has caused millions of dollars worth of damage. So immediate impact was devastating between 1915 and 17, so that's 2 years. Cotton crop in Alabama alone went from 1.7 million bales to 515,000. That's a 70% decline from one little bug. That's why pests are so awful for agriculture, and finding ways to combat these pests is so important. So it would go on to estimate 20 to 40 million dollars in damage to Alabama's cotton crops over the next 80 years. Similar to, and things similar happen in Texas and Carolinas. So talks about combating the boll weevil was tough. Um, they couldn't find a way. Pesticides were used, but they also killed good insects, so they couldn't really find a good solution to the problem. Um, as destructive as the boll weevil was, there was an advantage to the fact that it only affected cotton. So if it were eliminated from cotton fields, it could be controlled. Pests that impact multiple crops are harder to contain. Um, so today there are detection devices that can alert farmers when boll weevils are present, and they can know whether that they don't need to plant cotton there. Farmers can use cultural practices, which are making changes to the environment that discourage pests, to prevent the spread of these insects. So for boll weevils, that meant planting cotton early, stimulating early plant development with nutrients and weeding, removing the stalks from the field after harvest, so that boll weevils don't breed in them. Boll weevil traps are actually placed outside cotton fields to capture them before they enter the field. So they actually reduced pesticides by 75%. There are farmers in place trying to prevent insects like the boll weevil from entering the country. If you've driven out to the state of California, you might have noticed ag inspection checkpoints. Ag is such a big industry in California, the state stops people to see what kind of produce they're bringing in. That's because we don't want to bring in harmful pests into the state. It's going to hurt. Remember we talked about Florida, how Florida had such an impact in its citrus industry. Okay, so that's why these regulations are so important. So the boll weevil is not the only pest that they worry about. There's still no set pesticide that kills just the boll weevil. They have to do all these environmental practices to prepare against it. But now we kind of know more about it, so we know about more how to prevent it. But here's some more few common pests with the fruit fly. It's considered a dangerous pest around the world. Nations and states try to control the pest by keeping uninspected fruit and vegetables from moving across the borders. The old world bollworm. Home gardeners may know this pest as a caterpillar that feeds on the tips of sweet corn. However, the bollworm can attack many as 180 different plants. So that means it's very hard to detect and hard to stop. Cattle fever ticks. So it's an arachnid, is a parasite on cattle that can carry serious diseases and can kill them. It's probably mostly at the southern border of Texas, and we have a program established to keep them out. Imported fire ants. So they not only form large nests in field that damage crops like soybeans, citrus, but their nests can also damage farm equipment if you drive over it. They're huge. You drive over it and you could break your equipment. And it poses a threat to humans and animals. So those are just some examples. So an important part of pest management is actually controlling weeds, so weed management. A weed is any plant growing where it doesn't belong. So even a good plant could be a weed if that's not what you're trying to grow. So if you're growing cotton and you have Johnson grass, which is not harmful, that's a weed because that's not where you want it to grow. For those who grow crops, weeds are a problem because they deprive the crops. They compete with the crops for the nutrients and water. We want all the crops to get everything that they're supposed to. We don't want the weeds taken away from it. So weeds can also introduce insects and disease to the crops. So weeds are usually controlled by herbicides. Plant disease is a problem that also falls under pest category. For disease to thrive, there needs to be a plant that is vulnerable, the disease and the organism that causes it, and the conditions need to be right for growth. It's a disease triangle. So they can come from natural causes like fungi, viruses, or bacteria, or from nutrient deficiencies or air pollution. Because they need certain conditions to thrive, disease can be a problem one year but not the next. So the conditions kind of have to be right. An example of a disease that's occasionally a problem is ergot. The fungi grow on grains of wheat in low-lying areas in the wet seasons, and they turn them black if undetected. If it gets into the food supply, if people eat it, they can get ergot poisoning. So this can actually make hallucinations and other terrible symptoms. Looks like that. So disease is a pest. So solutions for problem pests. So we've, genetically modified a lot of our seeds and plants to be more resistant to some of these pests, which is great. We can introduce predators, parasites, or viruses that attack the problem species. So for example, the lady beetle, which is a ladybug, is a natural predator of aphids. And aphids, they suck the sap out of new growth. They're very tiny little insects. So farmers, especially in greenhouses, they will release ladybugs, and the ladybugs will eat the aphids. But not every pest problem in ag has a biological solution. Sometimes we have to use pesticides. There's 3 types of pesticides: insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. They kill insects, weeds, and fungi. They are efficient, but they can also have a problem. Often they're bad for the environment. Sometimes they don't always work. Sometimes the pest may get resistant to it. That means that it's no longer poisonous to them, and they've adapted. So then we have to come up with a new pesticide. It says in the U.S., 1.1 billion pounds of pesticides are used every year. That's a lot of chemicals released into the environment, and that's why the EPA regulates it so carefully. All right. So then last we'll talk about each type of pesticide briefly. So insecticides, those are going to affect the insects, help kill the insects, but remember they can become resistant to those. And you got to be careful because they can affect livestock and humans. Herbicides can be selective. They can only kill certain plants or non-selective. Like an example would be Roundup. Fungi are particularly difficult to kill. They cannot produce chlorophyll, so they are dependent on the host plant to do that for them. They also reproduce quickly, so getting rid of them takes several applications of pesticide. Um, some can be used to prevent the growth of fungi altogether. However, it takes a lot of upkeep. Um, so pesticides need to be used as sparingly as possible. Chemically are usually one of several pest control methods. Agriscientists are constantly looking for ways to develop safer. We've got the biological methods, we've got changing your environment. Either way, summary of this lesson is pests are detrimental to agriculture, but there are ways